It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia has become one of my favorite topics here on the channel. It's a show I've loved for years, long before I even thought about starting this channel. But after nearly 2 decades, over 160 episodes, the series has started to feel like it sort of lost something. Not bad, just kinda flat. Like, I've generally still enjoyed these newer seasons, but it just hasn't scratched that same itch that the series did when it was young. But honestly, Always Sunny has been in the process of dropping maybe its best season in quite some time. It felt like a return to the Always Sunny of yesteryear. No huge character arcs, no trips to Ireland, no half-hearted redemption attempts. Just the gang at their worst, their most unrepentant. But what changed? How did a series that felt like the writers and stars had sort of lost that connection to the common man and who their characters were find that spark again? Back in the long gone year of 2022, Charlie Day, Rob Mack, that's legally his name now, and Glenn Howerton started a rewatch podcast of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Now, rewatch podcasts aren't exactly something new or groundbreaking. Most of us have probably seen or heard of at least one at some point, but usually it's just a couple actors on the show rewatching the series that sort of defined their career. Things like the Ned's Declassified rewatch podcast, where we learned about all the weird sex stuff happening behind the scenes that literally no one wanted to know about. But the Always Sunny podcast, similar to the show they're watching, was different. Charlie, Rob, and Glenn aren't just the stars of the show, they are and were the creative heart of the show. They still serve as the main writers for the series, and a lot of what happened in the show is based on stuff that really happened to them. Like, apparently Glenn really did get rear-ended while eating cereal while driving and came into the office super hot as a result. And it's while they were doing their rewatch, and I'm using the term rewatch lightly because they would often get so distracted that we'd barely hear about the show, that the 3 core creatives accidentally rediscovered what made Sunny work. What gave it that edge, that cruelty, that spark. And that rediscovery is what brought season 17 to life. It's how the podcast ended up fixing It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. So, I want to start off by saying that while some people would certainly make the argument for it, I don't think Always Sunny ever got bad per se. There were episodes and arcs that I wasn't a huge fan of, but I don't think the series ever got outright bad. I think the closest verbiage I can think of for how to describe it would be stale. There's this stretch of seasons, around seasons 13 to 15 or so, where the series, in my mind, sort of felt like it started to coast a bit. There are episodes with these hugely powerful moments, like Charlie's beautiful moment where he's grieving for the relationship he never got with his father. But overall, these seasons just felt like they didn't quite have that classic Always Sunny it factor, you know? Like, we'd get those hyper-emotional moments, and just earlier in the season, they had a monkey serving beers in the bar. It was just all over the place and not necessarily in a good way. In a way, it kind of felt like the gang was actively searching for something new to say, but at the same time, they weren't entirely sure what their new message was supposed to be. And I think not only is it fine, but that it makes sense. They've been doing this show longer than most people stay at a single job. Finding something new and interesting to say and new places to take these characters gets more and more difficult as a show not only continues, but finds more success. Not to mention that since they've been working on the series, the world changed. The tone of comedy changed. Comparing a comedy from the mid-2000s to a series today, you'll see vast differences between them. And as the series evolved as time went on, they started to drift away from the thing that made the show so popular in the first place. Watching 5 maniacs chase the worst possible solution to what should have been a mundane problem. It's not that the energy was gone, but it definitely felt off. Scenes started feeling less like scenes and more like individual skits. Episodes got higher and higher concept, and while that can have merits on its own, sometimes getting too abstract doesn't work for specific shows, and I think Always Sunny is definitely one of those shows. I'm not saying the gang can't go crazy and do batshit insane stuff. That's more often than not where the gang shines. But doing a clip show-esque episode where the gang starts to devolve when they no longer know whose flashback they're in feels more like it would fit in with an episode of Rick and Morty. But I have to be honest, I immensely respect them for going out of their way to actually try different things. It takes a lot of balls to look at your widely popular series and say, okay, we did that already. Let's try something new with it now. Though I think the fact remains the same. The series was at its best when the gang didn't need some huge international trip or multi-season character arcs. The gang was designed to be terrible people, so letting them play around in the mud just sort of felt like where they naturally belonged. They probably just needed a bar, a plot, and a common enemy. By the end of season 15, it felt like the show was either going to need to make a change or continue to slowly fizzle out. And then, they started the podcast. The year was 2022. A lot of fans probably expected the typical rewatch experience, though as we've already talked about, this podcast was anything but. It gave viewers an insight into the madness that is the minds of Charlie, Rob, and Glenn. They got this peek behind the curtains that, at times, felt like it was just their characters in the bar having some pointless argument. It could feel like it was an unscripted and unreleased episode of Always Sunny. These weren't just actors telling stories, these were the minds behind the show. This was the gang. And whenever they would actually start digging into the stories of whatever episodes they were vaguely talking about, you could see the gears start to turn, that things started to click. The character dynamics, how small the stories used to be, how chaotic, how much fun they used to have just trying to make each other laugh.
He ain't gonna quit.
See, I bet you if you pop those jeans off, you're gonna find a sweaty hog that won't quit either. Come on.
From what I remember from listening to the podcast, I binged a good bit of it after I finished my Always Sunny ranking video. The episode that stuck out to me as the funniest and most memorable was the one where they didn't even talk about an episode, but they instead talk about how Rob almost got into a fight at a fast food restaurant. It's this kind of dumb, stupid story that initially fueled the early seasons of Always Sunny. It wasn't like they were planning on coming into this podcast with a grand vision of trying to get back to their roots. It was just these conversations that ended up doing just that on their own. You can even hear it happening in real time if you listen to the podcast. Rob routinely talks about how they just sort of used to throw their characters into a simple scenario and see how things would naturally unravel. Glenn talks about how Dennis changed over time, sometimes getting into how Dennis eventually became a bit too self-aware. Charlie would bring up how much he loved the older stuff where everyone was just an absolute moron. This ended up not just being talk, but rather it was the core creatives of the series rebuilding their understanding of what the series initially was, what Always Sunny was about. The rewatch would ultimately allow themselves to get back into their old mindset and remember what they were thinking when they were writing these classic bits that everyone loves and remembers so fondly. They remembered what Always Sunny was, who the gang was, and most importantly, why these characters worked in the first place. So now, with all this in place, let's take a look at the most recent season of Always Sunny at the time of writing this, season 17. I'm sort of plowing past the Abbott Elementary episode because, to be frank, it felt like more of the same for what they were doing. It's probably the weakest of the season from what I've seen so far, but from here we could see the podcast's influence on one of the best seasons of Always Sunny we've seen in years. I don't want to go through every episode here. I'll probably pick up my review of Always Sunny again at some point, Bob's Burgers too. I just sort of burnt myself out on those series for a while. But the episode definitely felt like a step back in the right direction. It felt meaner, dumber, more focused. It felt like Sunny. That slow meandering was gone, as was the weird push towards redemptive arcs and overly meta commentary. Instead, we got vintage Always Sunny. Broken people doing broken things and making everything worse for everyone along the way. And that's exactly why these series worked in the first place. Let's take a look at Season 17, Episode 3, Dennis and Mac Become EMTs. This feels like the best episode I've seen so far from the series' return to form. So the Mac and Dennis subplot in this features, surprise surprise, Dennis and Mac becoming EMTs, or at least pretending to become EMTs after they buy a decommissioned ambulance. This idea feels straight out of an earlier season. In fact, they kind of did something similar to this earlier in the series, where Dennis, Charlie, and Frank all pretend to become cops and get an old police car. This plot feels both fresh yet familiar in terms of Always Sunny. We've seen them do similar things, so we're not surprised that this is the route they'd go, but it still feels different enough that it's not a one-to-one retread. We also have Charlie and Frank doing a The Bear type deal, and Frank is trying to use the spicier and spicier food Charlie is cooking to poison the lawyer, who we now see for the first time in many seasons. And Dee is door dashing food around the city and getting progressively more and more injured. These are all fairly straightforward and kind of dumb plots that feel like they hit that old Always Sunny vein that we've been missing. And then at the end of the episode, they just sort of say screw it and decide to combine all of the ideas. Everything in the back of an ambulance goes terribly as the spices make it harder and harder to see. The lawyer ends up getting injured and blamed for everything. This has all the hallmarks of a classic episode, right down to the gang somehow managing to get away with everything, and we see them kind of ruin someone's life, someone who thought they'd get down into the mud alongside the gang. Season 17 wasn't some grand reinvention of what Always Sunny was. It wasn't them trying to evolve the show into a new form. What it was a reminder of what the series always was, what it always excelled at. 5 terrible people, a generally terrible idea, and little to no actual consequences. And that reminder came when the people who made the show, who are the show, took the time to sit down, rewatch where they'd been, and along the way, rediscover that spark that made Always Sunny feel like Always Sunny in the first place. And when they got back into the swing of things with season 17, it felt like the first time in a long time that they weren't just going through the motions. It felt like they were having fun with it again. And that's the power of reflection. The Always Sunny podcast didn't fix the series because they figured out some grand mystery. It fixed the show because Glenn, Rob, and Charlie started listening to themselves, to each other. Season 17 felt like the gang didn't come back together, but that they remembered who they were. And for longtime fans of the show, that's enough. But anyways, this has been 10K Bill, and thanks for watching. Like this video if you liked it, dislike it if you disliked it, comment down below what you'd like to hear me talk about next, and of course, make sure you subscribe for all your entertainment-related content.